All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Note Investor podcast. So in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about 10 ways that you can be a better note buyer and not just an investor in general. But what I'm talking about today is building relationships with asset managers and things that you can do in the process of a transaction to be a better counterparty and to be the kind of person that asset managers want to work with. So, one of the biggest complaints that everyone hears in the note industry is buyers not being able to find deals. And while it's certainly true that there's probably less inventory out there than there was maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago, when there was still a lot of inventory from the financial crisis, what I've kind of observed as I've resold a lot of reperforming notes on the open market or clean certain assets out of my portfolio is a lot of people are just not really sure how to go about being a good counterparty and buying notes. I've seen a lot of what I consider to be kind of crazy behavior, and I've encountered a lot of buyers that, quite frankly, I'm not going to work with in the future. So I thought it would be good to kind of go through and summarize some of the things that you can do to be a better counterparty and someone that asset managers really want to work with. Because one thing that I found as I've moved along in the note game is I've been able to develop a lot of good relationships with asset managers. And asset managers will often send me assets directly before they send them to their wider list. And the reason they do that, and in some cases they've cited this specifically, is they know that if they send me something that meets my criteria, that I'm going to close on it, and they can rely on that. And they know that if I find a problem, I'm going to let them know what it is. And if I can't close on it, there's going to be a good reason. So I want to share some of the things that you can do as a note buyer to improve those relationships and become one of those go-to buyers for some of your asset managers. And I should kind of start by saying too that, one of the things that I noticed when I started trying to buy notes was that sellers and asset managers were very standoffish. And this really confused me because in other domains, if I've got money and I want to buy something, it's not a problem, right? I mean, when I bought my primary residence, or whether you buy a car, or whether you buy things on Amazon, if someone's got something for sale at some price and I've got money, there's no issue. But in note buying, it's very, very different. It's kind of a niche, kind of opaque business. It's very relationship focused. And at first I didn't understand this at all. It made no sense. I was kind of offended at times. But there are actually, now that I've spent a little more time on the other side selling notes, I now kind of completely understand why note sellers are like that when they encounter somebody new. So there are a couple of reasons for that. I mean, one is there's this sad reality that most quote unquote note buyers don't actually buy notes at all. There are a lot of folks out there who will just kind of kick tires, ask questions, ask for more information. But at the end of the day, they're never going to actually pull the trigger. And that can be for a variety of reasons. One, they just might be interested in notes and kind of want to check it out. A lot of them are just afraid, various things. They're afraid of making a mistake. So there's a big chunk of people out there who will talk to you and submit bids who are just never going to close. The other problem is, as most of you probably know, there are a lot of joker brokers out there. So a lot of people posing as note buyers are just looking to get a hold of the tape so they can blast it out to everybody they know, hoping someone else wants to buy it, and they can make some small commission acting as middleman. And of course, those trades just don't really close. So when you're approaching a new asset manager or a new seller, the first thing they're probably thinking, at least I am, is, okay, are they a time waster? Are they a joker broker that's going to blast my tape all over the place? So the first thing you kind of want to do is let them know that you're not in either of these two buckets. And I'll say too that once you get past this and you kind of build a relationship with a asset manager, and when you actually close with someone afterwards, the whole dynamic changes. They go from standoffish to wanting to work with you, wanting to send you more product. And I've worked with, I think I've closed with like 9 or 10, maybe more different sellers so far. And it's always interesting how the dynamic flips once you've done a deal. Once you've done a deal with someone, that kind of puts you in a different category on their list. They know that you're not in one of these two buckets. So this is just something that's important to keep in mind as you're approaching sellers for the first time. They want to know if you're one of these two buckets, and you need to make sure you let them know that you're not. Now, there is definitely kind of a chicken and the egg component, right? I mean, if you haven't closed with them before and they're skittish and don't want to send you stuff because you're new, how do you overcome those hurdles to get them to send you assets that you can then scrub and then bid and then close on? So it's definitely kind of a chicken and the egg thing. And the reality is a little bit of this just takes time to overcome. It takes talking to a lot of different asset managers, bidding on a lot of different stuff. But, given a reasonable amount of time, you can absolutely get there. Not a problem. So now let's get into kind of the top 10 list here of things you can do. So number one, make it clear up front that you are not a broker. So let them know what you're buying for. You might be buying for your self-directed IRA. You might just be buying for your own portfolio. Also, let them know that you respect non-disclosures and you're not going to share their data. The reality is NDAs are probably not that enforceable. I mean, if you do sign an NDA and they send you a tape of assets and you blast it all over the internet and all over Facebook and everywhere else you can think of, they're probably not going to follow through and, sue you or whatever, but they're sure as heck not going to send you anything else. And a lot of people, not a lot of people, but some people in this industry don't respect NDAs. They just sign them and say, yeah, whatever, and then go and do their thing. So when you talk to them up front, make it clear you're not a broker, you're buying for yourself, and you respect their NDA. If for some reason they send you assets and they're not for you, but somebody you think they might be for, go ahead and talk to the broker and say, hey, I think you should send them to these, or if it's okay, I can pass them on. But, that's kind of a corner case. Make sure they know you're going to live up to your agreements. Number two is actually know what your buying criteria are and know what you're looking for when you talk to an asset manager. So different asset managers are going to have different types of assets, and they get different types of assets at different times. When you have these initial conversations, if you can let them know what you're looking for, are you looking for firsts? Are you looking for seconds? Are you looking for commercial? Are there particular states, particular cities? Are you looking for owner occupied or vacant? Are you focusing on the performing side? Are you looking more for non-performers, or will you do both? The more you can tell them up front and be kind of granular about, hey, here's my model, here's what I'm looking for, the better off you're going to be. That's going to indicate that you're a serious buyer that knows what they want. If you're like, hey, I just want notes, send me whatever you got, they're going to go, this guy may be a joker broker who just wants to get his hands on whatever he can so he can blast it out, or this guy doesn't know what he wants. They may just be one of these time waster people that I run into all the time. So it's super, super helpful if you can communicate exactly what it is you're looking for. And the other thing you want to do up front, number three, is ask about their closing timeline and their expectations. Now this varies wildly. Typically about 2 weeks is typical. Sometimes people ask to close in 1 week. That's kind of tough to do. I have done it before. If they want to close real fast, then I kind of want to know the reason why. What's driving this? Is it end of quarter? They're trying to get rid of stuff, or what's going on? If you're dealing with a bank or you're dealing with a larger trade, then doing 30 days plus can be a lot more normal. But if you're buying one-off or two-off loans from somebody, usually 2 weeks is kind of a reasonable timetable. If they're asking for something super fast, that can also often be a red flag. It could be that they're a joker broker and they don't really have control of the assets. It can also be if there's something wrong with the asset. I had a seller one time, they said, well, you got to close, you got to wire funds in like 3 days. And I was like, that's never happening. And I don't know what's going on with this, but that doesn't make any sense. So something's wrong here. And it turned out in that case that they were about to lose the property at tax sale very soon. So they just wanted it off their books. And it's like, well, I don't want to hurry up and close so that I can now eat the loss. That's not doing me any good. But it's always good to be on the same page as the seller right off the bat. So, if they do have some crazy short expectations, it could be that they're unreasonable. It could be that something is wrong, which is the more common indication. But this is nice because it sets you off on the right foot, as you're going in. And if for some reason you need more than 2 weeks, like working with somebody recently where they had some special circumstances, they needed more time, and we talked about that up front, and so that was no problem because I understood what was going on and why they needed the time. So the general theme you'll see throughout these 10 are communicate. If anything, over communicate. That's really one of the keys to building relationships with asset managers. Number 4 is ask about their pricing expectations up front. A lot of times sellers have insane pricing expectations, and almost more often than not, I'd say the prices, the sellers are asking for way too much, and I'm not even going to bother bidding. So if they come, you ask them what they're looking for, or ask them what they're looking for on these non-performing assets, and they say, well, we like to get 75 to 80 cents on the dollar for these non-performers, then I'll just say, hey, look, I'm sorry, we're too far apart. Assets like this, I'm usually paying in the 40s to 50s cents on the dollar. And that's great because, for one, you're going to save yourself a lot of time putting together bids and scrubbing assets where you're never going to be able to close on because you're just too far apart. It also doesn't waste the seller's time with that as well. If their expectations are genuinely out of whack. But the other thing that happens too is sometimes the sellers come back and go, oh, well, no. Actually, we can do something probably in the 50s. Why don't you go ahead and just, submit a bid and we'll see where we are. But having that discussion up front really helps level set things. You also get a lot of information about, what the seller's looking for. I mean, sometimes the seller's pricing expectations aren't that crazy, and you can kind of adjust your bid a little bit accordingly. The more information you have up front, the better, both in terms of, not wasting time in situations where you guys aren't going to be able to come to an agreement, but then also, just being able to submit bids that have a higher probability of getting accepted. So number 5 is kind of understanding or telling a seller when you're not going to submit a bid. So a lot of times they get tapes of assets, and the assets on them just don't fit my particular model, so I'm not going to submit a bid. Think about this for a second from the seller perspective, right? You meet someone who's a new buyer, you talk, you start sending them tapes of assets, and you never hear anything back. In that case, the signal to me as the seller is, well, this person isn't interested in buying my stuff, so I'm not going to send them stuff anymore. I'm just not going to do it, because what's the point? I never hear back from them. I send them stuff and I get crickets, right? Well, what I recommend doing, if the seller sends you stuff and they don't fit, just let them know you're not going to submit a bid. So you can come back and say things like, hey, thanks for sending me this tape. However, I see that all these assets are in New York and New Jersey. I don't buy in those states, but I'm really looking for assets in Michigan, Indiana, Ohio. Let me know if you have anything there. I also buy in Florida. Or, hey, thanks for sending me these assets. I see that these are all vacant. I'm really looking for owner-occupied assets that have a shot at getting reperforming. Please let me know when you have something that fits my criteria. Because what you can do over time is kind of train sellers to send you stuff that you want to buy. And the more that sellers know about your criteria, your model, your thought processes, the more they can send you stuff that you want to buy. I'm never hesitant to tell sellers about exactly what I'm looking for or my model, right? Some people think of that as like their secret proprietary information. But if sellers don't know what you're looking for, they can't send you the right stuff. And a good opportunity to communicate that is when they send you a tape of stuff that doesn't fit your model. You can come back and tell them why. It also lets them know that when they send you stuff, you're looking at it. They're not just throwing it over a wall and it's disappearing into this black hole, because if they get that idea, they're going to stop sending you stuff. It's a way also to keep the lines of communication open, even in a situation where you're not going to be able to submit bids. Number 6, and this is a big one. This one is kind of a pet peeve of mine. And this is, don't send in lowball offers. For me personally, when I get a lowball offer, and I get a lot of them, it indicates to me that the buyer isn't serious. And I'm not sure where to start really with this one, but I mean, some of the offers I've gotten, I got an offer ways back about, it was on a performing asset. I think they bid 30 cents on the dollar. Like they bid less than if it was non-performing. And the reason was they were concerned about risk. But this is where, talking to the seller up front about pricing expectations is a good thing. And if you're way out of bed, if the seller wants 80 cents on the dollar and you're only willing to pay 40, just don't submit the offer. Because I know for me, lowball offers just indicate a non-serious note buyer, someone that I really don't want to work with. So it's a really, really good way to piss off asset managers. And I really recommend not doing it. Now, it's okay, like I said before, if you want to communicate, hey, you're looking for 80 cents on the dollar. I'm usually more in the 40 to 50 cent range. So, I'm sorry, I think we're just too far apart here. That's a reasonable thing to come back and say. But, if someone's asking for 50,000 for a note, don't come back and offer 20,000. They're just going to scratch you from your list. So that's kind of it, not lowballing from the seller perspective, but from your perspective as well. Someone's asking for 50,000 for a note, you offer 20 and they snap accept and go, okay, how does that make you feel? I mean, to me, that indicates like, whoa, something's off here. Is there something wrong with this asset? Is there a fatal title flaw? Is it about to get lost to tax sale? Is the property even there? Like, to me, like all kinds of alarm bells go off if a lowball offer gets accepted. So I really don't see the scenario where you profit from making one of these. I mean, maybe you're hoping that, okay, the borrower is asking for this price, I'm going to lowball. And maybe it turns out that the seller is actually just really desperate to get rid of this and they were asking for more, but they're just going to accept my low offer. And it also happens to be a good quality asset. I think your probability of that happening is super low, and your probability of pissing off the asset manager and hurting or destroying the relationship with them is way, way higher. So really recommend staying away from this one. I could have used a lot more colorful language and didn't, but let's just say I'm really not a fan of lowball offers. So if you do have to send them, please don't send them to me. All right, so number 7 is when you are submitting a bid, credible bid, be clear about your assumptions. One of the best lists, I didn't put the list here, is from Dave Putz. When he submits a bid, he's got like 10 criteria of his, expectations and assumptions, and it's really, really good and easy to work with. So when you're submitting an indicative offer, some of the things you might include are say, okay, I took a look at the taxes. I saw that there were, $685 in delinquent taxes that need to be paid, and I have factored that into my bid. If I run into other taxes or liens, I would expect those to be netted from the price. Or if your bid is heavily dependent on the BPO value, you could say, hey, this is based on the BPO value of $65,000 that you provided. And that sets you up so that if you find out after the fact, the BPO value isn't 65,000, it's actually 50,000, you can come back and adjust or even cancel your bid. Or if you find other taxes or other liens, you can say, well, I stated up front, I expect these to be netted out. It turned out there was a city code lien for $350. So I expect that to be netted out of my bid. The other thing you run into sometimes on taxes are sometimes properties are actually divided up, are actually on 2 parcels. And I've run into ones before where I check out the main parcel, the taxes are current, and then you find out there's this weird sliver of land that the property is also on that kind of got missed in the taxes, and that might have some delinquent taxes on it. So the more you can communicate up front on what's going into your indicative offer, the easier it's going to be after the fact if you do find things and have to come back and adjust the price. So doing this up front is really helpful versus just throwing out a number. Now, number 8 is if you do find a problem, let the seller know right away. I mean, it's not uncommon to find problems in your due diligence, especially if you're buying contract for deeds. I run into title defects all the time. A lot of times the BPO values come in low. Sometimes I find out the property was trashed, or a really common one is a lot of sellers like to list their assets as owner occupied, and then you find out later that they're vacant. I mean, I found ones that were listed as owner occupied where I talked to the city code guy and they had been vacant for like a couple of years. But if you find this, let the seller know right away, and then also provide them the data, right? So if you have an O&E report with title defects, send them a copy of the O&E report. Hey, there's this break in the chain, or there's this missing assignment. Can you fix this for me? Or if you have a bad BPO or the property comes back and it's trashed, send them the BPO, send them the photos. Say, hey, the BPO value was listed at 65. My BPO came back at 50 and the property looks really rough. Here's the BPO that I had, with pictures, right? So the more you communicate, the better off you can be. And do this right away. Don't wait 2 weeks, right? It's always annoying as a seller if you're trying to sell an asset and someone ties it up in due diligence for a month and then comes back with a problem that they could have found right away. That's always very annoying. So, and when I've done this, when I've stated assumptions up front, and then if I did run into a problem where I had to cancel a bid and then provided the information that I found, I've only ever had one seller get upset with me. And this particular person, who will go nameless, isn't someone that I want to work with anyhow. So that was okay. But everybody else I've ever done this for, they're always perfectly fine with that. They go, oh, okay, thanks for the information. Or in some cases, maybe we can renegotiate price depending on how bad the defect happens to be. But like I said, problems are normal, but let the seller know. Don't wait a month. And then when the seller follows up, go, oh yeah, by the way, BPO value was a little low. I'm not going to close on this. That's not the best way to handle things. And before I get into number 9, I want to say a few words on fading bids. So if you're not familiar with fading bids or what that means, that basically means adjusting the price. So if you're going to fade a bid, it might say, okay, I bid $20,000 on this asset, but I found some problems, and so I need to adjust my indicative offer to $17,500. I don't do this real often. I think I probably do this less than other people. I will fade a bid if it's something that's quantifiable. So if I get a lien that shows up on an O&E report, or there were delinquent taxes I didn't see, I'll come back and say, okay, there were this lien or these taxes that I didn't know about originally for this amount. And so I'm changing my bid by that exact amount. If the BPO value comes in low, more than likely, I'm typically, and this is where mileage varies, I'm tending to cancel my bid instead of fading it. And a lot of that has to do with my model, where I'm most often buying non-performing assets that have a chance to reperform and often have some equity in them. A lot of times if the BPO value is low, it just ends up falling outside of my model, and I'm more often canceling instead of fading. Where you would fade on BPO value is where, let's say you're buying a non-performer that's upside down, where you're doing your pricing based off of your BPO value versus your unpaid balance. In that case, if your BPO value comes in low, you may be fading based on that. So main point I'm trying to make here is be thoughtful when you do it. And I definitely prefer having something that's quantifiable. And so that leads me into number 9, which is don't be Inspector Columbo. I run into many buyers like this, and I call them Inspector Columbo because there's always just one more thing that they have a problem with, or they need to get resolved, or that they're worried about. So what Inspector Columbo does is they'll fade bids for unquantifiable reasons. I've had sellers come back and go, well, just a little bit nervous about this. I don't know. I'm not so sure about this neighborhood. Could you maybe lower the price a little? Or, I don't know. This borrower, they seem like they might be a little risky. I'm not sure if they have good credit. Whenever I've encountered buyers who do this kind of stuff, they never close, no matter what. So if I run into Inspector Columbo, I know that they are not going to close, no matter what. And I've even made the mistake of, accepting a price reduction just to get it closed quickly, even if I didn't necessarily agree with their rationale. I've done this once or twice where I've said, okay, they want $500 less. Let's just get this done and move along. It's not worth the brain damage. And whenever I've done that, they've always come back with one more thing. Well, I'm not so sure about this. Maybe we could lower it another $500. And then my response is not the rant of explicatives that are going on in my head, but I say, thanks. I think this just isn't going to work out. And then I'm probably never working with them again. If you really, really, really want to piss off an asset manager or a note seller really badly, agree to a price and then come back later and go, well, can we have a little lower price? And then if they agree to that, come back later with, I'm still a little concerned. There's this other thing I'm worried about. Maybe we can lower it a little more. That's a good way to get just blackballed by someone. So I really don't recommend doing that. The other thing I don't recommend, and maybe this is just more of a personal pet peeve, is don't ask the seller to negotiate with themselves. I get really annoyed when someone's made a bid, I've accepted it, or I've countered and they've accepted, and they come back and say, I'm worried about this or that. Can we lower it some amount? Well, no, what's the amount? I'm not going to negotiate with myself. You know, it's pretty poor practice to do that. And it kind of makes me wonder, like, do they think I'm some kind of gigantic idiot or something? I get offended when they even ask me to do that. So don't go into Colummbo mode. These are typically note buyers who are afraid to pull the trigger. They're afraid of making a mistake. They're afraid of buying a note and having something go wrong. Typically, they have not closed on notes before. And I know as a seller, when I see someone going down this road, and I know this because I've played along a couple times just trying to get folks to close. When people go down the Colummbo road, they never ever close. And to experienced sellers, if you start doing this, it's a giant red flag. They're probably just gonna end up moving away. So please don't go here. And number 10 is don't get confused and think that you are originating a loan. So, in this business, now you might be doing seller finance. And in this podcast, I'm talking about when you are buying an existing loan on the secondary market. I have run into sellers who get confused and think they're Bank of America originating some kind of AAA platinum loan. So I've had them come back and say things like, seems like the borrower's credit isn't that good. And the one that took the cake for me is, hey, I'm worried about the borrower. I had my lawyer draft this document. Can you have the borrower sign this document saying that they promised to pay on the loan before I close? The answer to that is no. And hell no, I am not bothering my borrower. You can look at all of the loan servicing records, the call notes, all the history on the loan, and you need to make your decision based on that. Is not a situation where you're originating and, the borrower is making an application and providing all this information and showing why they're a really good credit risk. Because I can tell you right now, pretty much any loan, for the most part, you're seeing on the secondary market, the borrower has bad credit. It's not good. If their credit was good, that loan wouldn't be showing up on the secondary market, either as a non-performer or as something that's performing but has lapsed in the past and is now reperforming. So don't get confused on this. Just understand that too, right? Like a lot of these, especially the performing loans, you're buying them at very high yields, 10% plus. I bought them over 20% yields for performers in some cases. And with that goes risk, right? Now, if you want the AAA platinum, US bank originated loan on a luxury property in Manhattan, you can probably find those to buy, but you're going to get really small yields, right? I mean, there's no free lunch. It's like you learned in a high school economics class. If you want higher yields, there's risk that's going to be coming with them. If you want to take out all the risk, you can buy some treasuries at 1.5% or 2%. I don't even think you can get 2% on those these days. Or you can buy some corporate bonds, that are fairly safe. It's all relative. So if you're interested in this, and most people are interested in this business because of the potential for higher yields on performers, or what I call kind of novelty returns on non-performers, there's going to be risk that comes with it. So your criteria are going to be different than your criteria in buying an existing loan in the secondary market is going to be different than the criteria a big bank is using to originate a brand new loan that they want to be super, super safe. Okay. So to kind of wrap this up, I just want to emphasize that, the purpose of this podcast is to talk about how you can be a better note buyer and somebody that asset managers want to work with. And I can tell you that asset managers, they want to work with people who are going to close. So they want to work with note buyers who know what they're looking for, who aren't going to mess around with lowball bids, or who, when they do find a problem, are going to communicate really well and aren't just going to jerk them around or try to, fade bids for unquantifiable reasons. And they want people who are going to be able to complete their due diligence and close in a reasonable amount of time. So hopefully these 10 things help you out and help you build more relationships with asset managers. And, because I can tell you right now, even though this environment is a little tighter in terms of the inventory available than what it was a few years ago, there are plenty of deals out there. But where I see a lot of people making mistakes is their buying process is problematic. And when they do meet asset managers, they're often damaging those relationships. So do that. Hopefully that helps you out. As always, drop me an email, dan@fusionnotes.com, or find me online. Happy to answer any questions you got. Or if you got ideas for other podcasts or other topics you're interested in or want to learn about, don't hesitate to reach out. All right. Thanks a lot, everyone.